Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kamish Orr, and today I thought I'd do something a little different and give a very brief review on the new Amazon documentary on Reggie Jackson, just called Reggie. I just to give you a little bit of background, I am a little bit biased here. I was born in the early 70s, right around the time that Reggie was making a name for himself with the Oakland Athletics. And so my middle name is actually Jackson. Um, my dad was such a huge Reggie fan that he gave me the middle name Jackson. He probably would have named me Reggie Jackson, or if my mom didn't veto him on the first name. And then by the time I could really start to watch and follow baseball, Reggie was with the Yankees. And I think that's probably a good reason why the Yankees became one of my favorite teams. So in any event, so I have a little bit of bias going into this. I have a good background on Reggie Jackson. I've actually met him at the Field of Dreams here. I live in Iowa, a couple hours. Well, yeah, a couple hours, a little less than 2 hours, I think, from the Field of Dreams. And every year, pre-COVID at least, they would have these games with former baseball stars that they would invite, and the Team of Dreams, I think, is what they called it. And they would have the Team of Dreams kind of play like kind of an exhibition game, and so it was really cool because you could be within a few feet of some past stars that were there. I remember the first year in particular, there was Pete Rose, Tony Gwynn, Ozzie Smith, Wade Boggs, Frank Thomas, I believe, was there, and a number of others that were there at the Field of Dreams. And you could spend a little bit extra to get a photo taken with them and autographs and that kind of thing too. And one particular year, I took my dad and my son, and we met Reggie Jackson and had a photo with him and that kind of thing because I'd never had a chance to meet him in person before. And honestly, at that meeting, Reggie didn't really have time for anybody. So it wasn't the best meeting of somebody who you kind of look up to. Um, but again, I think because of the travel, because of it's not really close to anything, close to any major airports, so all of the guys had to travel, and so they weren't. None of them were in the greatest moods, I don't think, just from the travel involved and that kind of thing. But and it was a pretty long day. But in any event, so that's my only interaction with him. So I don't have totally rose-colored glasses on when it comes to Reggie Jackson. Um, but I do have a little bit of bias towards him in the sense that he's definitely on my list of favorite players, despite other than just the name, just because of all the stuff that he's accomplished. He accomplished in his career. So with that background and knowing that I've paid attention to Reggie for a long time, I've seen a lot of pictures and video and his accomplishments and all of that fun stuff. I wasn't really sure what to expect from the new documentary. So I just kind of want to give you that background so that you can kind of weigh that as you hear my take on the documentary. And really, the documentary I think it does a good job of kind of laying out the his history, of course. So you get some of the, obviously the main highlights are going to be the more famous instances of his career, um, him coming up in the minor leagues. You get a little bit of his family background involved. You get him joining the Athletics, uh, his dealings with Charlie Finley, of course. There's a lot of that. How the mustache craze with the A's got kicked off, and the part that Reggie played in that. Of course, you hear his take on the '71 All Star Game home run that he hit off of the light tower. Was it the light tower in Detroit? Yeah. Um, his dealings with free agency and that kind of thing. How his high amount of contract, or how his big contract affected the way the Yankees players kind of dealt with him as he came to New York. because he had this huge contract already. So it kind of soured um, relationships even before they could begin there. Um, and then, of course, it talks about his dealings with Billy Martin and those clashes that he had with Billy Martin, but also his relationship with George Steinbrenner, which was very positive and continued for the rest of Steinbrenner's life. There is some, a little bit talking about his history, of course, some history from the '77 World Series Game 6, where he hit 3 homers off 3 straight pitches. And then I believe the next year he let off with a home run. So he had like 4 home runs on 4 straight pitches or something like that. So it does a good job of like laying out the history, I think. So it covers all the high points that you would expect from a documentary like this. It gets into some of the gossipy stuff, of course. He talks a little bit about like his perspective on the supposed beef that he had with Thurman Munson, which, from his perspective, he didn't really have a beef with Thurman Munson. It had more to do with, I think, the way he joined the Yankees with the large contract, and um, the Yankees didn't really think that they needed another star, if that makes sense. So that one of the things that it kind of talks about is the main quote that he had, that he's the straw that stirs the drink, and which is on its face seems like a very egocentric comment to make, but in the grander context, he was really referring to, maybe the Yankees needed just that extra ingredient to make them successful. And if that's the case, maybe he was just that extra ingredient. He was the straw that stirs that drink, the extra ingredient in the drink, not the guy that's like the number one carrying the team, but like he's just the extra ingredient they made to do that. At least from his perspective, that's kind of how um, he when he said it, he didn't mean anything derogatory against Thurman Munson or any of the other Yankees by it, but that's the way it was kind of interpreted. So I guess it covers a lot of those high points, what you would expect. So in terms of my expectations, it met all of my expectations in terms of what it was going to cover. Well, I was looking for a little bit maybe more kind of behind, stuff that's not as in the media and that kind of thing. So there were a couple of, I guess there were a couple of segments that I surprised, maybe too strong of a word, but that I wasn't expecting. Um, and one of them was his relationships, his relationships with other, not just baseball players, but other sports stars and that kind of thing. Just from him being a star during that time, um, kind of opened the door and gave him a chance to meet other stars in that realm at the same time. And so he had relationships that he had built up with other, you know, obviously with the people that the players that he played with. So there are instances where the documentary has him talking to some of his former athletics teammates today, talking with them today, and talking about his relationship with them and that kind of thing, and how the team was back then and how they viewed it and that kind of thing, which was interesting. But then there's also segments where he's talking to Hank Aaron, for example, um, and they're talking about baseball as it relates to them coming up in the game, and what they had to deal with in playing and that kind of thing. It also Dr. J. He has a big relationship with Dr. J, and so there's a segment where he's talking to Dr. J. Even though Dr. J was never a huge baseball fan, he was a Reggie Jackson fan, and vice versa. So I thought that was interesting. The other sports personalities and other players and that kind of thing that he talks to during the documentary. Of course, his car collection and that kind of thing too. The thing that was, I think, most surprising to me that I didn't, which it shouldn't be, is there was I'd say a strong focus on race as it relates to his career and how it's related to his life, I guess. So he came up in the 60s, the late 60s. And so, and I think a lot of what he dealt with back then really colored the way, no pun intended, really, really colored the way his career went and that kind of thing. He came up playing, in the minor leagues down in Birmingham, in the 60s with all the race stuff going on. And so he found it very difficult dealing with all the racism that he was dealing with as he was, coming up, because he wasn't from the South. So it was just all new to him being in the South, for one. And he really wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, and into the major leagues so that he could get out of there. It's a very similar. I read, I read Dick Allen's the book about Dick Allen, God Almighty Himself, I believe it is, or something called something like that. And there are a lot of similarities in terms of how what they had to deal with when they were coming up through the minor leagues to try to play Major League Baseball. So I found it interesting that as he was coming up, that he was a pretty quiet. He was not very outspoken until a little bit later, when he realized that he had to be outspoken. He almost felt like he had a responsibility to be outspoken, and not to be silent on issues that he saw, that he felt either disrespected or felt like he wasn't getting what he deserved and that kind of thing, which again, that shaded the way he handled, like, his contract and that kind of thing later on. Same similar story with Dick Allen and how Dick Allen was coming up as well. So there's really a strong focus in the documentary talking about race and how it affected his career, not only in the minor leagues, but throughout. The other interesting thing, some of this, if you've heard about the documentary, you may already know this, but there were a couple cases where he was trying to buy, a partial ownership share in one in the Oakland A's that got turned down by Bud Selig, I believe. And then subsequently, the Dodgers, when the Dodgers were up for sale, he was part of a group with Bill Gates and a couple of big investors. And again, it didn't go through. And he attributes a lot of that to the fact that he didn't fit in with the other owners, if that makes sense. And again, he attributes a lot of that to his race, and the way the way the system is set up, in terms of the baseball ownership system is set up to kind of not allow somebody like him to be a part owner of a team. So he had a couple of shots and just wasn't, both of them got kind of turned down. And he really feels like race played a huge part in the reasons why he wasn't allowed to get part ownership of a team. So I thought that was interesting as well. And the other thing is, I think it really, and they showed this in the documentary, I think it really affected the way or the reasons for him leaving the Yankees organization as well. Because he didn't feel, even though he had a role that he was, the second he retired, he was offered a job by George Steinbrenner with the Yankees to come back, which he took. And then he worked for the Yankees for many years. But it got to the point where he didn't feel like he was really, almost like he was just in a token position and didn't really have any real pull with the team or major team decisions being made. Like his voice wasn't being heard, in other words. And so, there was a segment there where he talks to Hank Aaron, and Hank Aaron was saying that he has an office in Atlanta at the Braves Stadium, and Reggie's asking him about that, and Hank Aaron says, yeah, it's the office is there so that if anybody asks the Braves organization, hey, does Hank Aaron have an office here? They can say yes. But he has no role whatsoever. You know, they're not, they have no role for him there other than he has an office there. So I think Reggie saw that a little bit of that with the Yankees. You know, he was given a role, but his opinions really weren't listened to. They didn't weigh his opinions in decision making at all, and so he didn't really feel like, as time went on, his voice was being heard as much. And that's one of the reasons that he went. He left the Yankees organization to work for Houston, which he talks a little bit about in the documentary as well. So that whole aspect was something that I found really interesting. I haven't really heard it talked about that much. I always wondered why he would leave the Yankees, who one of the organizations he's very heavily associated with, leave them to work with the Houston Astros. But I think it makes a lot more sense because he was just really looking for some organization that would really listen to his ideas and involve him a little bit in decision making, and that's what Houston was able to give him. In any event, so that's just a quick synopsis of the documentary. I think it's really good. If you're a huge Reggie fan, or I think it was just cool just to see some of those highlights throughout his career. And it did have a couple of talking about race and relationships, and seeing other his interactions with other players and that kind of thing, which I wasn't. I guess a little bit unexpected to me going into it. I wasn't really sure what it was going to focus on. So yeah, I thought it was really cool. I recommend you check it out if if you're a Reggie fan at all. Go check it out. Let me know if you do check it out, or if you've already watched it. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I may do some of this here or there. Checking out, I have a lot of baseball books I've read, so I may do some of my takes on different baseball books and like mini reviews of those. If you'd like to see more of that, let me know that in the comments as well. And of course, I have my normal stuff, Baseball Maelstrom League, that I'm doing with Payoff Pitch Baseball right now. So follow that if you're interested as well. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, have a great evening.